When it comes to remake a video game, there are many ways to do it. You could keep the core of the game intact, just give it a new coat of paint, quality of life updates, and maybe extra content as in the case of Square Enix 2D HD remakes. You could go further than that by not just giving the game a brand new look, but also a brand new gameplay system and remixing level designs as in the case of Capcom's Resident Evil games. Whatever approach the developers may take, once you label a game as a remake, there are certain expectations to such a title, be it like having the same core characters and keeping the same settings, or iconic elements of the game like its game progression, items and abilities being kept intact. So, what expectations should you have for a remake of a game, of a series that has been remixing its characters and settings and gameplay mechanics for like 14 mainline titles? What is Romance of the Three Kingdoms 8 and why should you care? Well, as the title suggests, ROTK8 is the 8th title in the long-running historical simulation series developed by Koei, or current Koei Tecmo. Some of the noteworthy points that makes it stand out from the rest of the series are: Number 1. The game is one of the 4 titles that allow you to play as an individual instead of a whole faction, with the other 3 titles being the 7th, 10th, and 13th. Number 2. The game features an absurd amount of scenarios that you could start in, and even goes further than Zhuge Liang's death in 234 AD, when most other games in the series stop at like 225 AD. Number 3 is the first title to feature marriages via special events and even allow the player to have offsprings. The latter point, though, is unfortunately only available with the expansion on PC and is missing from the PS2 port. For these points, the remake is pretty faithful to the original game and even featuring a buttload of more fictional scenarios too for good measure. However, when you get to the core gameplay, the remake differs significantly with the original game, so much so that I would argue calling the remake a remake is pretty misleading. In this review, I will go over in detail both the original game as well as the remake. For the original game, there will be slight combination of footage of the PS2 version through emulator, because my old PS2 is pretty much a brick years ago now, and the Steam version, which includes the power-up kit expansion that has a few things missing from the PS2 version. And for the remake, the footage is of the latest version of the game, including features from the Destiny and Strategy expansion. Now that's out of the way, let's get on with the review then. Number 1. The non-combat progression. As mentioned previously, in ROTK8, you play as an individual, which could be a free officer who is not affiliated with any faction, a common officer who serves under a governor. A governor, well, governs over a city and makes sure it's well developed, fend off enemy invasions or lead the offense themselves. Tactician is somewhat like common officer, but you would be asked for advice by the governor, and the more intelligent you are, the more accurate the advice you can give. The Viceroy is like the governor, but you have controls over more than one city. And lastly, the ruler, who has control over the entire faction. Depends on what kind of officer you are, the actions you can do differ, but you only have so many action points to spend per turn, with each turn being 1 month in a year, and after 3 months has passed, a council or parliament in the remake occurs, which is where the factions plot out their next political move. Let's slow down a bit and talk about these 3 months between the councils. The original game is a bit of a slow burner. Everything you do is an incremental increase that takes a while to see noticeable change. For example, you are given the task of the season to develop a certain facility by 30 points. An officer of average stats all around might just barely reach that threshold, even all their action points dedicated to clearing the task. In fact, you often see officers you're not controlling massively underperform. But in the remake, it's not unusual to see an officer achieves 400% or even 500% the given milestone. The pacing of the game has been massively enhanced in the remake, and this has a snowball effect in making the remake basically an entirely different game from the original one. Not just stopping at the city development being much faster, personal growth of your character has also been overhauled and massively streamlined. In the original game, if you want to learn new abilities, you need to satisfy certain conditions, like max out observation at certain facilities and hope the seasons there teach you the ability, or max out friendship with another officer that has the ability that you don't, then keep bugging him until he decides to teach you said ability. But each officer has a certain affinity to others based on various factors like their historical achievements and affiliations or their personalities, so if you are trying to converse with an officer who has bad affinity with your character, the relationship building is a very slow and painful process. In the remake, you can learn new abilities or upgrade ones you already have by spending a type of currency, which you can earn via almost anything you do in the game, from doing side quests or triggering events to doing unit tactics a number of times in battle or giving a simple friendship item to an officer you currently have maximum trust with. The officer affinity thing is still present in the remake, but the game adds new ways to interact with other officers like giving gifts, requests to have a friendly duel or debate, all of which raise the relationship point certain values unaffected by the officer affinity, basically bypassing the hassle that is incompatibility between two officers. Having trusted confidence nearby gives you all sorts of benefits, from a boost in performance in doing tasks to lowering an item price when you're shopping or give you more points in stats growth or to learn new abilities from time to time, and most importantly, massive boost to your unit damage in battle. Sure, the benefits of having trusted confidence were also there in the original game, but its effects weren't so pronounced to the point of eclipsing almost every other aspect of the game, and sure, the remake wants to emphasize human drama as stated in the trailer and various interviews, but I think they really went overboard here. One new thing that was added in the Destiny and Strategy expansion of the remake is the gem system. This one is kinda similar to the ability learning thing, as you spend a currency to unlock gems that offer various bonuses. Most of these bonuses are passive stats up or unlocking new commands that eliminate some of the minor inconvenience aspects within the game, like being able to set up shop to earn passive income as a free officer, or being able to actively teach other officers abilities instead of leaving it to chance. I am somewhat neutral on this gem system because they are essentially just quality of life features that are nice to have, but nothing too game changing. Though some stuff like being able to actively teach other officers new abilities just make the game even easier than it already is. Number 2. The Seasonal Council or Parliament. After each season has passed, the officers of the city gather for a council to plot out the next course of action for their city. In the original game, you may receive reports of a lot of external events before council starts, like appearances of bandit force or disaster strikes in certain regions. The base game of the remake suspiciously has these events missing, and was one of the reasons why I was hesitated to do a proper review of the game when it first came out. Fortunately, the expansion did add in a new system called Turning Point that compensated for these missing turns of events. So basically, after each season passed, the gauge on the top left corner of the screen here rolls up a certain number of points. The amount of points that goes up depends on whatever was happening throughout the season, like the more battles that happens, the more points the gauge gets, and once the gauge reaches 100 points, a turning point event occurs and stays in effect for several seasons. Which turning point event occurs also depends on what's been happening throughout the season. Like, if a lot of battles have been happening, then there will be a higher chance of the event that creates public unrest happening and make it more likely for peasant revolts to occur. The turning points also have a massive game-changing effects. Like, for example, I had this one season where factions were scoring alliances left and right, including my own faction with a neighboring one, because I was playing as an officer. I don't have any say in this, which kinda put a wrench in my plan as a governor because I was going to attack that faction very soon right after. Then I got the in-name only turning point event, which nullified the effects of alliances, allowing me to proceed with my original plan, disregarding whatever my ruler was having in mind. I really like this new turning point system because I think it really gives a lot more life to the game, and it makes it feel like stuff is constantly happening without your input, which is something massively needed in the original game as well as the remake base game. Because without it, both games are pretty much just an endless and monotonous process of clicking a few options over and over again. It's one of my favorite things about the remake and one indisputable thing that I prefer the remake over the original game. That said though, aside from the turning point bit, I think the council section in the remake kinda loses some of its purposes. As I said earlier, the original game's pacing was rather slow, and deliberately so. This is applied to not just the city and character development I just went over, but also to the combat, which I will go over in just a little bit later. The game also only has over 600 officers across almost 100 years of the Three Kingdoms period, and there wasn't an option to extend an officer's lifespan, so you are almost always hungry for more officers, be it either because whoever you currently have are kinda shite, or your faction is expanding way too much and there just isn't enough officers to help you govern and develop all the cities. In contrast, the remake has over 1000 available officers, almost doubling the amount the original game had, so the pain point of talent shortage is a lot less apparent. And if you look at the map of the game, you might notice that each city usually is connected to 3 or 4 other cities by road, with only the ones around the edges only connected by 2. This means that unless you can somehow expand your force around and surround certain enemy cities, you usually can only go on the offense without reinforcements or can only request from one neighboring city, while the defensive side can easily request from 2. There are a few exceptions, like coalition attackers can summon reinforcement from forces within the coalition anywhere on the map, but aside from that, the defensive side is the one usually has the more advantage. Because of the above points, in the original game, battles are usually won before you press the button to march your units forward. As a wise man once said, all warfare is based on deception, and know thyself and know thy enemy, find victory in 100 battles, and all that jazz. Heck, that latter line was the first thing you see in the original game's opening. And herein lies why the council being so important in the original game, as it's where you plot out diverse plans to destroy your enemy from within, riling the peasants up to put a halt to the enemy city's development, planting moles to the enemy's units so you can confuse them in battle, or spreading rumors to decrease an enemy officer's loyalty and then struck a deal with them to turn cold in the next battle. Mind you, the remake still has all of these options, it's just that they aren't as important due to changes in gameplay, and this is kinda a blessing in disguise depending on how you look at it, to be honest. If you play as a ruler, then you're free to do whatever you want, but if you play as a common officer, then your choice is merely a suggestion. It is entirely up to the AI to decide whether to go through with your suggestion or not, and most often than not, the AI is questionable at best, being way too passive for their own good or making unnecessary movements that could cost precious resources and talents. Sure, you can spend privilege points to force the ruler to do as you say, but these points are hard to come by, only given when you do exceptionally well at the task you are given, reaching over 200% milestone mark, and as I've said earlier, it is rather hard to achieve that mark with your average officer in the original game, while the remake gives them out like candies, which leads us to the biggest difference between the two games. Number 3. The battle system. Before each battle begins, you will participate in a World Council to determine how you would like to prepare your units for the coming battle. Here, your tactician will brief you on the state of the battle and advise you on what kind of marching formation or stratagems to use. You can even ask opinions from other officers to see if they agree with what the tactician said. It's not particularly deep or insightful conversations or anything, but it gives a lot more life to the characters involved, and the remake just completely strips out all of it. In the remake, the more strategic elements of the World Council, like choosing the speed to march your units if you're on the offensive side, whether to engage the enemy at the outpost or to wait out for a siege, or where to lay out traps if you're on the defensive side, are heavily streamlined to the point of unrecognizable. The maps of the original game were very big. One battle can only take up to 30 turns, reinforcements usually arrive at the 5th turn, and it takes several turns just to reach the outpost location halfway through the map. Being able to choose which speed to march your units give a lot more freedom to strategize your offense. Maybe you are aware that the enemy city currently doesn't have that many troop stations in it right now, and you want to finish off what's there before the horde of enemy reinforcements come, so you choose to force your units to march twice the speed of their regular speed at the risk of the troops being fatigued at around turn 10. Or maybe you don't want to get caught in the enemy's laid out traps or ambushes, so you choose the formation that offers better visibility at the risk of slower movement and almost guarantee that you will need to take on the enemy's reinforcement too. And even if you did choose a slow marching formation at the start, Mid-battle, you can still choose to force the unit to do an emergency force march at the cost of some troops being left behind. The strategy you can utilize is always flexible. On the other hand, if you're on the defensive side, you have the option to choose wherever on the map to lay out traps to not only have the potential to inflict damage on the enemy, but also to stop them in their tracks for several turns. You also have the option to choose to engage with the enemy at the outpost at the halfway point of the map, maybe to have a better chance of capitalizing off any traps that get activated, or to avoid damage to the city gate at the risk of being maybe overwhelmed early, or you could choose to wait inside the city gate to do a long drawn out siege hoping that you could outlast the enemy. All this strategizing gone in the remake. The maps have been massively downsized to the point that except for a few mountainous areas, you can run into combat with the enemy very early into the battle, sometimes even on the very first turn. And probably because of the reduced map size, the option to choose the marching speed of your units is nowhere to be seen along with the officer advice system. Traps can now be laid out at only specified spots instead of you having the freedom to set it anywhere you want. Units cannot retreat back to the city, instead needing to camp outside, so now instead of being able to hold out a siege like an actual battle, if your units are low on troops count, you need to let them run around the city like headless chickens. And the biggest difference of them all is the actual combat. Aside from normal attack, your units can do special tactics that gives out greater damage than normal attack, as well as some side effects like being able to confuse enemy units. In the original game, these tactics are repeatable across the whole battle, provided your units have enough morale to do them. But tactics have limited success rate to them depending on the proficiency level the officer has with the tactic. You can train the tactic outside of battle, but the level only goes up to 4 out of 6 available levels, and at level 4 the success rate is still only like 75%. To get the final 2 levels, you need to slowly train the tactics through actual combat. And this is only applicable to the officer you are currently playing as. For the rest, training through battle is the only option because the AI is too stupid to know the option to train actually exists. And because of that, there is always a dilemma presented in battle. Do you go ahead with the tactics in hope of being able to dish out greater damage than usual at the risk of failing and basically waste your precious limited turn? Do you risk doing low success rate ones in hope of the officers being able to build enough experience over time so that future battles can go more smoothly in your favor? Or do you stick with higher success rate ones at the cost of your units being inflexible to different situations? Sure, this battle system can be a bit slow by today's standard, and it can also be frustrating at times if the RNG is not in your favor, which is why the pre-battle plotting is so important as I mentioned earlier. It, however, always offers a sort of risk and reward system that you have to engage with, helping the game stays interesting until, like, your faction has conquered 1/3 of China, which to be fair the game does turn into pretty big slogs afterwards, but still. Perhaps seeing the shortcomings, that is the slowness and the RNG phase of the original game, the remake opted for an entirely new battle system where tactics can only be activated just once within the battle, and the success rate is always guaranteed, and the effects of the tactics are massively exaggerated. With the right tactic level and support from other officers, you can wipe out like half of the enemy force with just one tactic activation. Sure, it does make the battles go by faster and in a way gives a more satisfying power of fantasy to the player, but number 1, this is not the combat of ROTK8. Number 2, this makes the difference between an excellent major officer and a minor one way too big, with the major officer being way too overpowered while the more minor ones basically turns into cannon fodders. Number 3, the combat being so easy to break can make battles turn monotonous rather fast. This is not even touching the plots or stratagems you could utilize. In the original game, these are comments that only the commander could use. They help slightly nudge the battle in your favor, but nothing game-changing, like raising morale of your units or digging holes outside of the castle wall to weaken its defense. And just like the tactics mentioned just now, this can also fail. In the remake, however, anyone in your army can use it, provided the stratagem gauge up top is full, and one of the 4 stratagems you could choose is making enemy units within the certain range of your commander unit panic, rendering them completely incapable of doing anything until they no longer panic, which could last several turns. Even if you haven't played either of these games, I trust that you understand just how insane that effect is. Sure, it goes both ways and you could be the victim of the enemy stratagems too, but the AI isn't smart enough to take advantage of it, which could mean less frustration on your part, sure, but an intense life or death battle for supremacy. Yeah, this one ain't it, chief. Number 4. The special events. In the original game, the interactions were rather brief and to the point, and random events are sparse, whereas in the remake, you probably can't go 2 turns without a random event about interacting with another officer popping up, and these events can be very varied and there are actual back and forth between the characters involved. This is probably the one thing that the remake is more long-winded than the original game, and aside from these random events, the remake also adds another system called Tails, where you can manually trigger events from a list provided you have satisfied the conditions. These events could range from historical events to the more generic ones, and the historical ones even have ranging paths that lead to another what-if event. Overall, the remake offers a lot more text for you to enjoy and more freedom to roleplay. That said though, since the conditions for the tales are clearly shown, and there are only so many random events that can happen before they start repeating, there is unfortunately a lack of sense of discovery that the original game has. The original not only has a lot less special events, but the conditions to these events are also more specific, borderline impossible to unlock for some if you don't use a guide. In a way, I can see this as the game encouraging the player to diversify their playthroughs, so whenever you see one pops up, there is an excitement of seeing something that you haven't seen before. Whether you can actually see those new events though is an entirely different matter. And because the pacing of the game is rather slow, plus the only way to actually finish a scenario being total unification does discourage you from actually finishing a playthrough in my opinion. In true fashion of streamlining the game, the remake offers a lot more ways to end a playthrough early, from achieving regional conquests to reaching certain milestones of fame, or simply collecting enough famous item sets. These additional ending conditions are definitely a huge win for the remake in my opinion, and does make me want to start another playthrough right after just finishing one. Number 5. The presentation. The original has this rustic and ancient feel to the art direction, with the officer portraits being drawn like that of a mural. The unique events take place in a separate space of what looks like a small stage and miniature of the character models, making it look like you are watching a puppet play being carried out. These points unfortunately weren't carried over to the remake, as everything in that game now has a much cleaner look to them, and the unique events were done in a traditional visual novel style, which isn't a bad thing in of itself, as they absolutely still do their job well, but it really loses what made the original game feel so memorable to me. The remake does try to bring up the ancient feel to the game whenever it can, like the event UI looking somewhat like the old standard paper, or having watercolor painting in the background of some of the UIs like the relationship menu or the transitions between seasons, so it's not nothing, but otherwise it's just slightly touched up version of the UI from ROTK8. What I found to be a bigger missed opportunity is that the remake, well, not remaking the old portraits into the modern style. Now I know that most of the old portraits from the original game didn't age very well, with a lot of the minor officers looking pretty generic and semi to each other, and the remake needs to reuse the majority of the portraits from previous game, but ROTK8 has quite a few unique officer portraits to it, like it's one of the few times you see Louis Bu wearing a helmet, the last time that Cao Cao wears a helmet, period, or the only time Zhuge Liang is seen without facial hair. The young Zhuge Liang portrait can be unlocked for use in the remake, and some new portraits seem to have drawn with the intention to respect the old ones, like Zheng Hui getting his hat back after not being seen with it since ROTK10 way back in 2004, or Guaijia's portrait being basically his old one drawn in the modern format. But these are the minority, and I think it's truly a shame. Another thing that I think the remake kinda missed the point is how the seasonal council is presented, though admittedly this is rather nitpicky. In the original game, your point of view is from the entrance of the hall looking in, so you can always see the two lines of official as well as the ruler being presented. With the way this is presented, you could see yourself as being one of the officials lining up, or the ruler sitting on the throne looking down. It'll work just fine. The map of China is also nicely visible right in the middle of the screen, making it easy for you to check the current status of the land as well as the connection between the cities so you can plot out your advance with ease. Also, because you could only see the gigantic hall this way, that combined with the music makes for some pretty damn heavy atmosphere. The remake did away with that and chose to have the point of view being inside the hall looking out, with the full portrait of your player character tucked to the bottom left, so you can no longer self-insert yourself into either the lined up officials or the ruler looking down at his subordinates. The base game of the remake didn't have the disaster system, as it only came with the turning point mechanics in the expansion, so the weather outside of the hall is always bright and sunny, giving off a dissonant feel to it because the heavy sounding music is still being played. I do like the fact that the map is now being presented as a war desk, making it feel like the officers are talking over it in real time, but the way it is drawn, you cannot see the roads connecting the cities and it is kinda hard to make out the cities up north too. Gameplay-wise, this is not that important because the map with the city infos is just a few clicks away, but presentation-wise I think it's just a huge miss. Sorry, editor me here. While gathering footage to edit the video, I came to the realization that the point of view looking out at the hall is the point of view of the ruler in the PC version, and it's not something that the remake totally made up. The common officer's point of view is still the same as the PS2 version though, so my point about the remake missing the point about where to set up the point of view in the console still stands. Another thing about the officer portraits, I just remembered that the previous game entry that allows you to play as an individual officer, ROTK8 has multiple portraits for certain officers depending on their age and status, as well as whether they are going out on battle or not. Had the 8 Remake done something similar, it would have solved my problem with the game not remaking some of the old portraits, like just let Cao Cao has his usual design during his free time but then gives him a helmet to wear when he's going into battle. Boom, problem solved. How hard is that? Also, checking back on ROTK8 did I realize that that game had actual briefing animation for the officer portraits, and that game is 10 years old at this point, whereas in 8 Remake portraits just kinda zoom in and out, which is good enough I suppose to make them not too static, but it's just such a downgrade from 13 and the portraits that do get animation. The animation looks like this. That looks so unnerving, what the hell. Thank God you can turn that off in the setting. Number 6. The music. I played the original game while still but a wee lad, so the game's soundtracks carry a lot of nostalgic vibe for me, especially the game's main menu theme. But to be honest, the game has some of the more annoying songs in the series in my opinion, like the theme of the central plains with all those gong banging sounds. Heck, the central plains battle theme is also annoying with its continuously rising rhythm. One loop of the songs is also very short, only a bit over a minute, so it can get extra irritating pretty fast. And to my surprise, the remake did do away most of those songs that I found to be annoying, while keeping the better ones untouched. And the new songs all mesh very well with the old ones, instead of feeling like the odd ones out because they were made 20 years later than the rest. Granted, they make the new songs for like half of the OST, but still, huge win for the remake here. In conclusion, the original ROTK8 is an acquired taste. It is a deliberately slow game, sometimes frustratingly so, but it was by design, and players who could get accustomed to that slowness and push through could be rewarded with a truly unique historical simulation experience. Was it perfect? No, not by any stretch of imagination. It has some gameplay balancing issue, and some of the more cumbersome aspects of the game definitely could use some streamlining to make the game more appealing to modern audiences. But the remake went too far in the streamlining of stuff that the game is fundamentally a completely different game with only a few core gameplay mechanics being shared with the original game. The game also misses out some of the key features from the original game, some of which were added back and even expanded upon with the strategy and destiny expansion, like the option to play as a vagrant army or the random external events with the turning point system. But some features are still missing, like the option to play as 8 different characters in one playthrough, some of the more specific, unique, but rather obscure special events, or the challenge scenarios that were added in the Power-Up Kit expansion, which were unavailable for the PS2 port, so it would have been really cool for the players to finally get a chance to see what the challenges have to offer, but alas. Calling the remake a remake of ROTK8 is like calling ROTK8 a remake of 7, and that just ain't true. In a way, I'm somewhat happy that the remake didn't render the original game obsolete, but at the same time, I wish the developers had just done a few extra things differently and called the game ROTK15 instead. Seeing as how there are so many differences between the two games, and half of the OST are new songs, I have a sneaking suspicion that the project started out as ROTK15 but got reworked into being 8 Remake somehow. But what do I know? Anyway, if you want to play an ROTK game that allows you to play as an individual officer that is easy to get into, easy to progress, easy to finish a playthrough, and overall just a comfy game to play every now and then without needing to make a large commitment, then ROTK8 Remake is the better game to look for. It is also more easily available too anyway. But if you want to have a game that you could spend hours plotting out things to overcome challenges, and don't mind some of the jankiness and less than stellar AI due to its age, then the original ROTK8 is the better game to look into. Personally though, I still think ROTK10 is the best game to play as an individual officer.